The heat in the Arizona Territory in the year 1887 was not merely a temperature, it was a physical weight, a heavy, suffocating blanket that smelled of scorched sagebrush and dry, red dust. It pressed against the wooden slats of the small schoolhouse, warping the boards and turning the air inside into a stagnant pool of chalk dust and restless energy. Clara May Rowe stood at the front of the room, her fingers dusted white from the arithmetic problems she had been scratching onto the slate blackboard. She was 24 years old, though the sun and the hard water of the frontier had begun to etch fine lines at the corners of her eyes, giving her a look of premature wisdom. She wiped her hands on a rag, her gaze sweeping over the 12 heads bowed over their desks. To the town council, these children were merely future miners, ranch hands, or wives. To Clara, they were the only thing in this desolate landscape that promised something green and growing. She reached for the small brass bell that sat on the corner of her desk. It was a delicate thing, out of place among the rough-hewn pine furniture, with a handle worn smooth by years of use. It had belonged to her mother, a woman who had taught piano in Boston before a consumption of the lungs and a desperate hope for dry air had driven them west. The West had cured the lungs but broken the spirit, and now Clara was alone. She had no husband to shield her, no father to provide for her, and no fortune to insulate her. She had only her certification, her reputation, and this bell. "That will be all for history today," Clara said, her voice clear despite the dryness in her throat. "Tomorrow, we will discuss the Louisiana Purchase. Please remember to clean your slates before you leave." As the children scrambled up, the noise was like a sudden rock-slide boots scraping on wood, laughter, and the clatter of tin lunch pails. Clara watched them pour out into the blinding afternoon sun, but her eyes lingered on one boy who moved slower than the rest. He was a Navajo boy, known to the census takers as Thomas, though Clara knew his grandmother called him Ashki. He was small for his age, with eyes that held a guarded, ancient wariness. He was the only native child in the school, allowed to attend only because his father worked as a stable hand for the livery, and the town charter had a loophole regarding civilized residents. Clara walked to the window, peering through the glass that was wavy with imperfections. Outside, the playground was a patch of hard-packed earth. She saw the inevitable circle forming. It was the same geometry of cruelty she had seen 100 times. 3 older boys, sons of the miners who worked the silver veins north of town, had cornered Thomas near the water pump. Clara did not hesitate. She did not wait for a man to intervene, nor did she weigh the consequences of stepping into a conflict that the town preferred to ignore. She moved out the door, her skirts kicking up little clouds of red dust as she descended the steps. "Billy McAllister," Clara called out, her voice cutting through the dry air like a whip crack. The largest boy froze, his hand half raised to shove Thomas again. He turned, blinking in the glare. "We was just playing, Miss Rowe." "You were playing at being a bully," Clara said, marching up to them. She did not raise her voice, but she possessed a stillness that made the boys shuffle their feet. "And I will not have it on school grounds. Step away." The boys dispersed, grumbling, kicking at stones as they retreated. Clara turned to Thomas. He did not cry. He simply dusted off his trousers with a dignity that made Clara's heart ache. "Are you injured?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "No, Miss Rowe." It was then that Clara felt the weight of a gaze upon her. It was a sensation distinct from the leering eyes of the miners at the saloon or the judgmental stares of the church matrons. This was heavier, sharper. She looked up, past the schoolyard fence, toward the livery stable across the main road. A man was standing beside a roan horse, adjusting the cinch. He was Navajo, tall and lean, with hair the color of midnight tied back severely. He wore the clothes of a man who lived between worlds, a white man's button-down shirt, dusty and worn, but tucked into trousers held up by a belt of intricate leatherwork. Around the crown of his hat was a band of silver conchos, hammered and etched with patterns that caught the brutal sun and threw it back in defiant flashes. It was Yazzie Begay. Clara knew the name. though she had never spoken to him. He was a tracker, a man the army used when they needed to find things in the deep canyons, and a man the town tolerated because he was useful. He was not looking at the boys. He was looking directly at her. His face was unreadable, carved from the same sandstone that made up the mesas in the distance. There was no smile, no nod of gratitude for her intervention with the boy, who she realized must be his kin. But there was no hostility either. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and piercing. It felt as though he was measuring her, assessing her structural integrity the way a carpenter assesses a beam. Clara felt a flush rise to her cheeks, heat that had nothing to do with the sun. She lifted her chin, refusing to look away, holding her ground just as she had with the bullies. For a span of 10 seconds, they were the only two people in the territory. Then, Yazzie swung himself into the saddle with a fluid, effortless motion. He turned the horse and rode south, the silver concho on his hat winking once before he disappeared behind the swirl of dust kicked up by a passing freight wagon. Clara let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She looked down at the brass bell in her hand, her symbol of order and civilization. It suddenly felt very small against the vast, wild silence the rider had left behind. The town of Copper Creek was growing, feeding on the silver that bled from the earth in the nearby hills. It was a place of raw lumber and raw ambition. The main street was widening, pushing back the desert scrub to make room for a new bank and a second saloon. Clara lived in a small, cramped room attached to the back of Mrs. Hawthorne's dress shop. It was a charity of sorts. Mrs. Hawthorne, a widow with a sharp tongue but a soft heart for strays, charged her a rent that was barely half of what the boarding house demanded. That evening, the air had not cooled. It hung thick and still. Clara sat at her small table, grading papers by the light of a kerosene lamp. The smell of stewed beans drifted from Mrs. Hawthorne's kitchen next door. "You are going to ruin your eyes, Clara," Mrs. Hawthorne said, bustling in with a basket of mending. She was a round woman, upholstered in gray bombazine, acting as the town's unofficial historian and news distributor. "I have to finish these. Martha," Clara said, not looking up. "The territorial superintendent is coming next month. Everything must be perfect." Mrs. Hawthorne sat heavily on the edge of the cot. "Perfect won't save you if the council decides they want to change. I heard talk at the Mercantile today." Clara paused, her pen hovering over a misspelling of Constitution. "What sort of talk?" "The Reverend Pike kind of talk," Mrs. Hawthorne said, threading a needle with vicious precision. "He says the school is becoming too secular. Says a woman alone doesn't have the moral fortitude to guide young minds in these modern times. He is pushing for a male headmaster. Someone married." Clara set the pen down. "I am cheaper than a male headmaster." "That usually counts for more than morality in Copper Creek." "Usually," Mrs. Hawthorne agreed. "But things are changing. Sheriff Cutler and the bankmen, they are stirring things up. They smell money. Clara, real money. Not just silver, but land. And when men smell money, they get particular about order. They want the town to look respectable. A spinster schoolteacher living in the back of a dress shop does not fit their picture of a booming city." "I am 24, not 80, Clara said dryly. "And I am hardly a spinster by choice of theology." "Hush," Mrs. Hawthorne admonished, though she smiled. "I am just warning you. Watch your step. Don't give them a reason. Reverend Pike watches everyone like a hawk looking for a field mouse." Clara stood up and went to the window. The glass reflected her own pale face, but beyond it, she could see the lights of the saloon down the street. The piano music was tinny and discordant. "I teach the children to read and write. Martha," "I teach them that the capital of the United States is Washington City, and that 2 + 2 is 4. I do not see how that threatens the sheriff or the reverend. Knowledge is always a threat to men who rule by lies." "Mrs. Hawthorne muttered, "just be careful, especially with, well, you know." "With what?" "With who you are seen with who you defend." Mrs. Hawthorne gave her a pointed look. I heard about the playground today. It is noble, Clara, truly. But Sheriff Cutler has been looking for excuses to clear out the Navajo settlement near the creek. He calls them a nuisance. He says they are blocking progress. If you are seen taking sides, I took the side of a child against 3 bullies, Clara said firmly. I will not apologize for that. Mrs. Hawthorne sighed. Just remember, dear, in the West, being right is often the quickest way to get a grave. 3 days later, the underlying tension that Mrs. Hawthorne had spoken of began to manifest in small, ugly ways. Prices at the general store seemed to fluctuate, depending on who was standing at the counter. The sheriff's deputies were seen more often, patrolling the streets with their thumbs hooked in their gun belts, their eyes hidden under the brims of their hats. Clara was in the schoolyard during the lunch recess. The heat was relentless. She sat on the steps, peeling an apple with a small penknife, listening to the chatter of the girls who were sitting in the shade of the building. Lila Benton, the 17-year-old daughter of the postmaster, was holding court. Lila was bright, sharp-witted, and too observant for her own good. Clara often thought she was practically a woman grown, waiting for the day she could leave Copper Creek for a city with paved roads. I'm telling you, it was not supplies. Lila was whispering, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. I saw them from my bedroom window. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. Maybe it was just whiskey for the saloon, another girl suggested. Whiskey comes in barrels. Lila insisted. These were crates, long, heavy crates. And they did not go to the saloon. They went straight through town, out toward the old quarry road. Clara's hand paused on the apple. The quarry road led nowhere but to the abandoned stone pits and the jagged edge of the Canyonlands land that bordered the main water source for the Navajo families. My PA says the sheriff was riding point, Lila continued, dropping her voice lower. And Reverend Pike was with them, sitting on the wagon bench like he was guarding the Holy Grail. But I heard the sound when the wheel hit a rut. It clanked, like metal on metal, heavy iron. Maybe it is mining equipment, the other girl said, losing interest. Mining equipment goes to the mine, Lila said with a scoff. The quarry is 5 miles in the other direction. And why move it at night? Why not in the broad daylight? Clara stood up, her appetite gone. She looked toward the horizon, where the heat shimmered off the red rocks. Sheriff Wade Cutler, Reverend Amos Pike, the 2 pillars of the town. One held the gun, the other held the Bible. If they were moving crates in the dead of night out toward the Navajo lands, it was not for the benefit of the community. Clara knew about the road project. The bank wanted to cut a direct trade route south, bypassing the treacherous mountain pass. The only flat ground lay directly through the valley where Yazzie Bigay's people watered their sheep and horses. The Navajo had a treaty, or at least a verbal agreement with the previous territorial marshal, protecting that water. But treaties in Arizona were made of paper, and paper burned easily if Cutler was moving heavy iron to the border of that land. It smelled of intimidation. It smelled of war. That afternoon, Clara dismissed the class early. The heat had become unbearable, and the children were lethargic. She sat at her desk, composing a letter to the Territorial Education Board. She was requesting new primers. The current books were falling apart, held together by paste and hope. Dear Superintendent, the students of Copper Creek show great promise, but we are severely hampered by a lack of resources. To build a future, one must have the tools to imagine it. She stopped. The door to the schoolhouse was open to catch the breeze, but instead of wind, a shadow fell across the threshold. Sheriff Wade Cutler stood there. He was a large man, his bulk running to fat around the middle, but he carried it with the confidence of a man who has never been told no. His face was red from the sun, and his mustache was waxed into sharp points. Miss Rowe, he said, touching the brim of his hat. He did not remove it. Sheriff, Clara said, setting down her pen. She did not stand up. To what do I owe the pleasure? Just making rounds, Cutler said, stepping into the room. His boots echoed loudly on the floorboards. He walked slowly, running a finger along the top of a desk, checking for dust. Wanted to check on our little investment. The town puts a lot of money into this school. The town pays my salary of $30 a month. Sheriff, I believe they are getting a bargain. Cutler chuckled, a sound like dry leaves crinkling. Sharp tongue. I always liked that about you. Clara, though some folks say it is unbecoming in a lady. Some folks have a great deal of time to talk, Clara replied evenly. Cutler stopped at the front of the room, leaning back against the blackboard. He crossed his arms. Speaking of talk, heard you had a little trouble on the playground the other day. With the Indian boy. There was no trouble, Clara said. I merely stopped a fight. That is my job. Your job is to teach white children to be good citizens, Cutler said, his voice dropping an octave. The pleasant veneer was thinning. It is not to coddle savages. It confuses them, makes them think they have a place here. Thomas is a bright student, Clara said, her hands gripping the edge of her desk until her knuckles turned white. And as long as he is enrolled in this school, he has a place here. Cutler stared at her for a long moment. His eyes were pale blue, devoid of warmth. You know, Clara, the council is meeting next week. We are discussing the budget. Some think we are spending too much on non-essentials. Maybe we need a teacher who understands the values of this community better. It was a threat, naked and unadorned. Are you threatening my position because I stopped a bully? Sheriff, I am giving you friendly advice, Cutler said, pushing himself off the blackboard. This is a hard country. A woman alone. She is vulnerable. Accidents happen. Reputations get ruined. It would be a shame if you had to leave Copper Creek with nothing but the clothes on your back. He walked to the door, then paused. Oh, and tell young Lila Benton to keep away from the windows at night. A girl needs her beauty sleep. She shouldn't be imagining ghost wagons. It is unhealthy. He walked out, leaving the door swinging in the hot wind. Clara sat frozen. He knew Lila had seen them, and he knew Clara was listening. She looked down at her letter. To build a future, one must have the tools to imagine it. She crumpled the paper in her hand. Books would not save them. Not this time. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out toward the distant red cliffs of the quarry. The sun was setting, turning the sky into a bruise of purple and blood orange. Somewhere out there, in the deepening shadows, Yazzie Bigay was likely watching the same horizon. She remembered the look in his eyes. He had seen the structural integrity in her. He had looked for weakness and found none. Clara reached into her pocket and pulled out the brass bell. It was cold metal, silent now, but as she gripped it, she felt a sudden, fierce resolve harden in her chest. They wanted to replace her. They wanted to silence the witnesses. They had underestimated the schoolteacher. She blew out the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. But she did not leave. She sat in the gloom, listening to the wind howl around the corners of the building. It sounded like a warning, or perhaps a call to arms. The dirty water was rising underground, just as Mrs. Hawthorne had feared. And Clara knew with a chilling certainty that before this season was over, the red dust of Copper Creek would be stained with something far darker than silver ore. The following afternoon, the heat did not break. It settled into the valley like sediment in a dry riverbed, heavy and unmoving. Clara sat at her desk, the schoolhouse empty save for the buzzing of a singular, fat fly hitting the window pane. The door creaked open. It was not the sheriff this time, but Lila Benton. The girl looked pale, her bonnet askew, glancing over her shoulder as if the devil himself were walking the main street of Copper Creek. Lila! Clara stood up, alarmed by the girl's trembling hands. What is it? Lila rushed forward, pulling a heavy, leather-bound book from beneath her shawl. It smelled of stale tobacco and damp earth. I found it, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Behind the old feed shed back of the post office. My PA told me to burn the trash, but this fell out of a crate that was not supposed to be there. Clara took the book. It was a ledger, The leather cracked and stained. She opened it. The pages were filled with columns of numbers and dates, written in a cramped, aggressive hand. It took Clara only a moment to understand what she was seeing. It was not merely a record of trade. It was a roadmap of corruption. There were entries for heavy machinery and mining explosives, delivered not to the silver mines, but to a location simply marked as the Springs. There were payments listed large sums, hundreds of dollars at a time next to initials that made Clara's stomach turn. W.C. for Wade Cutler, A.P. for Amos Pike. And there was a note, scrawled in the margin of a page dated 2 weeks prior. Relocation of indigenous obstruction requires additional funding. Water rights secured upon removal. They are not just building a road, Clara said, her voice hollow. They are buying the law to steal the water. Miss Rowe, Lila said, her eyes wide with terror. If my PA knows I took this, he will not know, Clara said firmly. She closed the ledger and tucked it into the deep pocket of her skirt. You did a brave thing, Lila, a very brave thing. Now go home, walk slowly. Do not look guilty. Lila fled, leaving Clara alone with the weight of the town's sins in her pocket. That night, the darkness was absolute. The moon was hidden behind a thick bank of clouds that promised a storm, but delivered only humidity. Clara lay in her narrow cot in the back room of Mrs. Hawthorne's shop, the ledger hidden beneath the loose floorboard under her wash basin. She was drifting into a fitful sleep when a sound shattered the silence. It was the sound of glass breaking not in her room, but next door, in the schoolhouse. Clara sat up, her heart hammering against her ribs. She grabbed her shawl and the heavy iron poker from the cold stove. She moved to the connecting door, pressing her ear against the wood. She heard the heavy scrape of a desk being dragged, then the crash of drawers being pulled out and dumped onto the floor. Someone was not stealing. They were searching. They were tearing the room apart with a frantic, violent energy. They know, Clara thought. They know the ledger is missing. She gripped the handle of the door, debating whether to scream or to hide, when a loud pounding on the street-facing door of the dress shop made her jump. Clara, Mrs. Hawthorne's voice boomed out, loud enough to wake the dead and certainly loud enough to startle a thief. Clara, I think I hear a coyote in the yard. Bring the lantern. The noise in the schoolhouse stopped instantly. There was a scuffle of boots, the sound of a window sash being thrown up, and then the thud of a heavy body hitting the earth outside. Clara threw open the door to the schoolhouse. The room was a wreck. Books were torn from their shelves. Slates were smashed, and her desk was overturned. But the intruder was gone. Mrs. Hawthorne appeared in the doorway behind her, holding a shotgun and a kerosene lamp. The older woman looked at the devastation, her face grim. That was a two-legged coyote. Mrs. Hawthorne said, seeing the overturned desk. And he was not looking for chickens. They were looking for this, Clara said, going to the floorboard and retrieving the ledger. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. And they will come back. Then you cannot stay here tonight, Mrs. Hawthorne said, blowing out the lamp to hide them in darkness. Upstairs, in the storage loft, and keep that iron poker close. The attack the next morning did not come with guns or masked men. It came with whispers. When Clara walked down the boardwalk toward the general store to buy ink, the air felt different. It was brittle. Two women she had known for a year, mothers of her students, saw her coming and crossed the street, lifting their skirts as if to avoid a puddle of filth. She reached the store, and the proprietor, a balding man named Mr. Henderson, who usually gave her a peppermint with her purchase, did not look her in the eye. "We are out of ink," he muttered, wiping the counter with a dirty rag. "I can see 3 bottles on the shelf behind you. Mr. Henderson," Clara said. "Reserved," he said shortly. "All of it." Clara stood there, confused. "Mr. Henderson, what is the matter?" He looked up then, and there was a mixture of pity and disgust in his eyes. "You should not be here, Miss Rowe, not after what folks are saying." "What folks are saying?" About you. A voice came from the doorway. It was Mrs. Miller, the baker's wife. She stood with her arms crossed, her face pinched tight. About you and the savages. Clara turned slowly. I beg your pardon. Do not play innocent. Mrs. Miller spat. Everyone knows. You go out to the rocks at night, meeting them, lying with them. That tracker, the one with the silver hat. They say you are trading your Christian virtue for whatever it is those heathens give. The accusation hit Clara like a physical blow. It was absurd, monstrous, and entirely fabricated. But as she looked around the store, at the averted eyes and the sneering faces, she realized the truth. The ledger, the break-in. They had failed to find the evidence. So now they were destroying the witness. That is a lie, Clara said, her voice trembling with rage. It is a vicious, hateful lie. Is it, Mrs. Miller stepped closer. A woman alone, no husband, spending all her time defending those people. It fits. Clara Rowe, it fits right well. Clara walked out of the store, her head high, but her insides were churning. The town was not just turning against her. It was being weaponized. By noon, the summons came. A boy brought a note to the dress shop. The school board was meeting an emergency session at the church. Clara was required to attend. The church was stifling hot. Sunlight streamed through the plain glass windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Reverend Amos Pike stood at the pulpit, his black coat buttoned to his chin despite the heat. Sheriff Wade Cutler sat in the front pew, his legs stretched out, picking his teeth with a splinter of wood. The 3 other board members sat with their heads down, looking at their hands. Clara walked down the aisle. The sound of her boots on the floorboards was the only noise in the room. She did not sit. She stood before the altar, facing Pike. You wished to see me, Reverend. We did not wish it, Miss Rowe, Pike said, his voice dripping with sorrowful piety. We are compelled by duty. Serious charges have been brought against your character. Charges brought by whom? Clara asked. By gossip mongers, by liars. By concerned citizens, Pike corrected. It has been brought to our attention that your conduct has been loose, that you have been seen in the company of men of low character, specifically, men of the Navajo tribe, in ways that are not befitting a molder of young minds. I have spoken to Yazzie Bigay exactly once, Clara said, her voice ringing off the rafters, to stop his nephew from being beaten by white children. Is compassion now a sin in this church? Do not blaspheme, Pike snapped. This is not about compassion. It is about morality. A teacher must be above reproach. And you, Miss Rowe, are tainted. The parents are threatening to pull their children. We cannot allow the school to fail because of your indiscretions. Clara looked at Cutler. He was watching her with a hooded expression, a faint smirk playing on his lips. He knew she had the ledger. This was not about the Navajo. This was about squeezing her until she broke. This is not about morality, Clara said, turning to face the sheriff. This is about what I know, is it not? Sheriff Cutler sat up, his eyes narrowing. I do not know what you are talking about. Schoolteacher, I am just here to keep the peace, and right now, you are disturbing it. I will not resign, Clara said, turning back to Pike. I have done nothing wrong. If you want me gone, you will have to fire me. And if you fire me, I will write to the territorial governor. I will write to every newspaper from here to San Francisco. I will tell them exactly how Copper Creek is run. Pike's face turned a mottled purple. You dare threaten us? I dare to speak the truth, Clara said. Something this town seems to have forgotten how to do? She turned and marched out of the church. Her legs were shaking so badly she felt she might collapse, but she forced herself to walk straight. Outside, the sun was blinding. Clara leaned against the rough wood of the church wall, trying to catch her breath. She saw a figure standing in the shadow of the livery stable across the street. It was Deputy Tom Vance. He was young, with a face that had not yet hardened into the cynicism of his boss. He was watching her. Clara pushed herself off the wall and walked toward him. Vance looked like he wanted to run, but he held his ground. "Tom," Clara said, stopping a few feet away. "You were in the store this morning. You heard them." "I heard," Vance said, looking down at his boots. "You know it is a lie. You know me." "I know what I hear, Miss Rowe," Vance said, his voice low. "Tom, look at me." She waited until he raised his eyes. "They are moving illegal goods, explosives, weapons. I have proof. Sheriff Cutler is involved. Reverend Pike is involved. I need help. I need the law." Vance's face went pale. He glanced toward the sheriff's office, then back at Clara. "Miss Rowe, please, just go. Pack your things. Leave town. I will not run." "You do not understand," Vance hissed. "You are standing on the tracks and the train is coming. Cutler, he is not just a sheriff. He is the hand of the mining company. If you have proof, bury it, burn it, and leave before an accident happens." "Is that a warning, Deputy?" "It is a favor," Vance said. "Don't touch Cutler. You will not win." He turned and walked away quickly, as if being seen with her was contagious. From the darkened interior of the livery stable, Yazzie Begay watched the exchange. He was not there for the drama. He was there because his cousin, a young man named Hosteen, had been arrested that morning for stealing a horse that belonged to the bank manager, a horse Hosteen had never touched. Yazzie leaned against a support beam, whittling a piece of cedar. He had heard the talk in the saloon earlier. He had heard the men laughing about the schoolteacher. High and mighty. They had called her, "Needs to be taken down a peg, needs a man to teach her her place." He knew this tactic. It was an old war strategy, used by the army and the settlers alike. If you cannot kill the warrior, you kill his name. You strip him of honor so that when you finally cut his throat, no one mourns. They were doing it to the woman. They were painting her with the brush of shame because she was inconvenient. He watched Clara Rowe standing alone in the dusty street. She looked small, fragile in her calico dress, but she did not look broken. She stood with her back straight, her chin lifted against the crushing weight of the town's judgment. Yazzie felt a stirring in his chest. It was not pity. He had no use for pity. It was respect. She was fighting a battle she could not win, armed with nothing but her indignation. He sheathed his knife and adjusted his hat. He could not intervene yet. To step in now would only confirm the lies they were telling about her. He had to wait. He had to watch. But as he looked at the sheriff walking out of the church, looking at the woman like a wolf eyeing a lamb, Yazzie made a silent vow. The woman would not fight alone much longer. That evening, Clara returned to the dress shop. Mrs. Hawthorne was sitting in the front room, the shades drawn. The shop was closed. A sign hanging on the door, "Illness in the family." "They threw a rock," Mrs. Hawthorne said flatly, pointing to a shattered pane of glass in the front window. 5 minutes ago, wrapped in a paper." Clara went to the table where the rock lay. It was a jagged piece of quartz. Tied to it with twine was a scrap of brown paper. Clara untied it and smoothed out the paper. The message was written in block letters, likely with a piece of charcoal. "Whore of the savages. Leave tonight, or tomorrow night the town will teach you a lesson you won't forget." Clara stared at the crude letters. The fear was there, cold and sharp in her gut. But beneath the fear, the anger was burning hotter than ever. "They want me to run," Clara whispered. "They want me to disappear so they can take the water and poison the land." "Clara," Mrs. Hawthorne said, her voice shaking. Maybe you should go to Tucson until this blows over." "It will not blow over, Martha," Clara said. She crumpled the note in her fist. "And I am not going to Tucson." She went to the loose floorboard and pulled out the ledger. She wrapped it in oilcloth and shoved it into her satchel. "Where are you going, Mrs.?" Hawthorne asked, alarmed. "I cannot stay here," Clara said. "If I stay, they will burn your shop down to get to me. I have to move. I have to find a place they won't look." "There is no place in Copper Creek they won't look," Mrs. Hawthorne said. "Then I will make one," Clara said. She checked the small revolver she had borrowed from Mrs. Hawthorne's nightstand, a rusty thing that looked like it hadn't been fired since the Civil War. "I'm going to the old ice house behind the abandoned hotel. No one goes there." "Clara, this is madness." "This is survival," Clara said. She paused at the door, looking back at the woman who had been her only friend. "If anyone asks, tell them I left. Tell them I took the stagecoach west." She slipped out the back door into the gathering night. The air was cooling, but the wind carried the scent of ozone and dust. A storm was coming. As she moved through the shadows of the alley, keeping low, Clara felt the eyes of the town on her. Every darkened window felt like an accusation. Every creak of a weather vane sounded like a threat. She reached the edge of the property line and looked back toward the main street. The lights of the saloon were bright, and she could hear the raucous laughter of men who were celebrating her destruction, men who thought they had won. Clara touched the pocket where the ledger rested against her hip. "Tomorrow night," she whispered to the darkness. "You want to teach me a lesson? Come and try." She disappeared into the blackness of the night, not as the schoolteacher they had shamed, but as a woman who had just declared war. And somewhere in the dark, she hoped the man with the silver conchos was listening. The darkness of the ice house was not the comforting, velvety black of sleep. It was a cold, damp suffocation that smelled of wet sawdust and trapped winter air. Clara May Rowe sat on a crate in the corner, her hands gripping the strap of her satchel until her fingers ached. Inside the bag, wrapped in oilcloth, was the ledger, the heavy, burning heart of Copper Creek's corruption. She had spent the last hour listening to the sounds of the night. A dog barking, the distant, discordant piano from the saloon, the heavy thud of boots on the boardwalks. Every sound felt like a prelude to discovery. The door creaked. Clara stiffened, her hand moving instinctively to the pocket where she had hidden Mrs. Hawthorne's rusty revolver. "It is me," a voice whispered. "Mrs." Hawthorne slipped through the crack in the door, carrying a small bundle of food and a canteen. She looked older in the dim light, the lines of her face etched deep with worry. "Did anyone see you?" Clara asked, her voice a harsh whisper. "No, the deputies are busy drinking at the Golden Nugget." "Mrs.," Hawthorne said. She set the bundle down, but did not let go of Clara's arm. "Clara, you cannot go. Not tonight." "I have to," Clara said, standing up. "If I stay, they will find me. And if they find me, this ledger disappears, and I disappear with it. If you run, you write the story for them." "Mrs.," Hawthorne argued, her grip tightening, "they are already saying you are a woman of loose morals. If you vanish in the night, they will say you fled because you were guilty. They will say you stole money, or worse. You will never be able to speak the truth because no one listens to a fugitive. I do not care about my reputation anymore. Martha, I care about staying alive." "Then care about this, Mrs.," Hawthorne said. Her voice broke. "They took Lila." The air in the ice house seemed to drop 10 degrees. Clara froze. "What did you say?" "Half an hour ago." Sheriff Cutler and 2 deputies went to the Benton house. They dragged that poor girl out in her nightdress. They are holding her at the jail. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "On what charge?" "Stealing federal mail?" "Mrs.," Hawthorne said bitterly. "They say she was seen taking a package from behind the post office. They say she is an accomplice to theft." Clara sank back onto the crate. It was a trap, a brutal, simple trap. Cutler knew Lila had found the ledger. He knew Clara would not leave the girl to rot in a cell surrounded by armed men. He was using the 17-year-old as bait. "He wants the book," Clara whispered. "He is trading her life for the evidence. If you run to Tucson now," Mrs. Hawthorne said softly, "Lila pays the price for your safety." Clara looked at the satchel. The weight of it was no longer just paper and ink. It was flesh and blood. The internal war that raged within her lasted only a moment. The terrified schoolteacher who wanted to flee to the safety of the city died in that cold, damp room. In her place, something harder, something forged in the heat of the Arizona sun, began to take shape. "I am not going to Tucson," Clara said. She stood up, smoothing her skirts. I am going to get more proof. The ledger is just numbers. I need to know what those numbers bought. I need to know what is in those crates at the quarry. The quarry? Mrs. Hawthorne gasped. Clara, that is miles of open desert, and Cutler has patrols on the roads. Then I will not take the roads, Clara said. She took the food and the canteen. Go home, Martha. Lock your doors. Do not open them for anyone, not even me. Getting out of town was harder than Clara had anticipated. The sheriff had not been idle. Men with lanterns were walking the perimeter of the main street, ostensibly looking for disturbers of the peace, but their eyes were turned toward the alleys and the shadows. Clara moved behind the livery stable, the smell of horse manure and dry hay filling her nose. She aimed for the sawmill on the edge of town, where the noise of the water wheel, though silent, now usually masked the sound of movement. She reached the back wall of the mill, pressing herself against the rough wood. A guard was standing on the bridge, smoking a cigarette. The cherry-red tip glowed in the dark. There was no way across the creek without being seen. Clara looked around, panic rising in her throat. She was trapped. If she stepped out, she would be seen. If she stayed, the sun would eventually find her. A hand clamped over her mouth. Clara tried to scream, to bite, to thrash, but the grip was iron-strong. A hard arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her backward into the deep shadow of a stack of lumber. Be still, a voice murmured in her ear. It was deep, resonant, and calm. Clara stopped struggling. She knew that voice. The hand released her slowly. Clara spun around, raising the revolver, though her hand shook violently. Yazzie Bigay stood there, blending so perfectly with the darkness that he seemed to be made of it. He looked at the gun in her hand, then up at her face. He did not look impressed. You hold that weapon like you are afraid it will bite you, he said quietly. I am afraid of what I might have to do with it. Clara hissed. What are you doing here? The same thing you are, Yazzie said. Trying to keep the peace by preparing for war. He gestured toward the guard on the bridge with a tilt of his head. You cannot cross there. He is looking for you. They are all looking for you. They took Lila, Clara said. I have to... I know, Yazzie interrupted. They took her to draw you out. If you walk into that jail now, with that book in your bag, you both lose, and my people lose the water. So I'm supposed to do nothing. You are supposed to be smart, Yazzie said. The sheriff thinks you are a frightened white woman who will run or surrender. You must be neither. He turned and began to walk away, moving silently over the sawdust-covered ground. He stopped and looked back. Are you coming, or are you going to stand there until the sun rises? Where are we going? To the place where the poison comes from, Yazzie said. The quarry. The roads are watched. We will not use the road, he said. We will use the land. Clara hesitated for a heartbeat. This man was a stranger, a man her own people called a savage. But when she looked at him, she did not see a savage. She saw the only person in Copper Creek who had looked at her without trying to own her or shame her. Lead the way, she said. The journey was a nightmare of physical endurance. Yazzie did not take the flat paths. He led her down into the dry, cracked bed of the seasonal creek, where the walls of the ravine rose 10 feet high on either side, blocking out the moonlight. The ground was a torture of loose stones and driftwood. Clara stumbled constantly, her boots slipping on the slick rocks. Every time she fell, Yazzie stopped. He did not offer a hand to help her up. He seemed to understand that she needed to find her own feet, but he waited. He waited with a patience that was more comforting than any words of encouragement. Why? Clara asked after an hour of walking, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Why help me? You could have stayed in the hills. This is not your fight. Yazzie kept walking, his pace relentless. The water belongs to the Dine, but the poison that Cutler pours into the ground will kill us all, white and Navajo alike. He stopped and turned to her. The moon was high enough now to light one side of his face, cutting it into sharp relief. I watched you, he said. For 3 years, I have watched the school. I saw you teach the children to read. I saw you wash the face of the boy who fell in the mud. Even though he was not of your blood, I thought all white people were the same. Takers, but you give."
"I have nothing left to give,"
Clara said, wiping sweat and dust from her forehead. "You have the truth," Yazzie said, "but the truth cannot survive if you go alone." He turned back to the path. "Come, we are close." The quarry was a scar on the land, a vast amphitheater of gray stone where the earth had been blasted away years ago. In the center of the pit, illuminated by the light of 2 kerosene lanterns, was a wagon. It was the same wagon Lila had described. Several large wooden crates were stacked on the ground beside it. Clara and Yazzie lay flat on their stomachs on the ridge overlooking the pit. There were no guards, only the silence of the desert. It seemed Cutler felt secure enough in his power that he did not need to guard his secrets in the middle of nowhere. "We need to see what is in those crates," Clara whispered.
"I will go,"
Yazzie said. "No," Clara said, gripping his arm. "I need to see it. I need to be able to testify to what I saw. If I am the witness, I must bear witness." Yazzie looked at her hand on his arm, then at her eyes. He nodded once. "Stay low. Move when the wind moves." They descended the slope, sliding quietly over the loose scree. When they reached the wagon, Clara pulled a small pry bar from the toolbox on the side of the buckboard. She wedged it under the lid of the nearest crate. It was stenciled with the words, "Farming Implements. Handle with care," with a groan of protesting nails. The lid came loose. Yazzie lifted it. Clara held her breath. Inside, packed in straw, were not plows or harrows. They were rifles, brand new Winchester repeating rifles, the metal gleaming with oil, and beneath them, in a separate compartment, were red sticks wrapped in wax paper, dynamite.
"Enough to start a war,"
Yazzie said softly. "They will plant these on my people's land. Then they will claim we are preparing to attack the town. The army will come. They will kill us or move us to the reservation in the south. And Cutler gets the water," Clara finished, sickened. "He creates a monster so he can be the hero who slays it." Suddenly, the wind changed. The stillness of the night was shattered by a low, moaning sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. Yazzie's head snapped up. He looked to the south. A wall of blackness was blotting out the stars. It was not a cloud. It was solid earth, lifted by the wind. "Haboob," he said. "Sandstorm. It is coming fast." "We have to go back," Clara said, grabbing the pry bar. "No time," Yazzie said. He grabbed her hand, his grip firm. "We cannot be out in the open. The sand will strip the skin from your bones. Come!" He pulled her away from the wagon, toward the sheer wall of the quarry. There was a small fissure in the rock, a narrow crack barely wide enough for a man. They squeezed inside just as the world turned into a screaming chaos. The space was tiny, a shallow cave that forced them to press together. Outside, the wind howled like a banshee, and the air turned into a solid mass of stinging grit. The light was gone, swallowed by the dust. Clara was pressed against the back wall of the fissure. Yazzie was in front of her, his body shielding her from the opening. She could feel the heat of him, the solid, unyielding strength of his back and shoulders. She was trembling, not from cold, but from the adrenaline and the terrifying proximity. She had never been this close to a man, certainly not in the dark, certainly not while the world ended outside. "Cover your mouth," Yazzie said. He pulled the scarf from his neck and turned, wrapping it around her face. His hands were rough, calloused, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. For a moment, his hands lingered near her face. In the darkness, she could only see the outline of his eyes. The barrier between them, race, culture, the strict laws of propriety seemed to be eroded by the wind outside. "You are shaking," he said. It was a statement, not a question. "I have never stolen dynamite before," Clara managed to say, her voice muffled by the scarf. "It is surprisingly nerve-wracking." A low sound came from his chest, a laugh. It was a short, dry sound, but it was there. "You have the heart of a coyote. Clara Rowe, you are small, but you bite." It was the first time he had used her name. The sound of it on his tongue felt significant, like a stone dropping into a deep well. "Yazzie," she said, testing the weight of his name in return. "What happens when the storm clears? We have the proof, but we are just two people." "Two people can start a fire," he said. He shifted slightly, trying to give her more room, but the cave was too small. His knee brushed against her thigh. The contact sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with fear. He reached down to her belt and took the revolver she had holstered there. "If we are to fight," he said, "you must learn to use this, not just hold it." He placed the gun back in her hand, covering her small fingers with his large ones. "Do not squeeze with your whole hand. You squeeze with the finger, smooth, like pulling a thread." Clara focused on his voice, on the warmth of his hand guiding hers. "Like this?" she whispered. "Yes," he said. His face was inches from hers. She could smell sage, dust, and the faint, metallic scent of the rain that refused to fall. "The bullet goes where the eye looks. Do not look at the gun. Look at the target. Look at the evil you wish to stop." "I see it," Clara said softly. "I see it clearly now." They stood there for what felt like hours, suspended in the eye of their own storm, while the desert raged outside. It was an intimacy forged in survival, a bond that was knitting them together tighter than any vows. When the wind finally died down, the silence was deafening. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in bruised purples and bloody reds. They pushed their way out of the fissure. The world was covered in a thick layer of red dust. The wagon was half buried. "We must move," Yazzie said, brushing the sand from his shoulders. "The storm will have covered our tracks, but it will also bring the patrols out to check the road." They climbed out of the quarry, moving quickly now. They had the knowledge. They had the witness. Now they just needed to get to the telegraph office in the next town over, or find a way to break the sheriff's hold. They reached the ridge of the canyon that overlooked the road back to Copper Creek. Yazzie froze, his hands shooting out to stop Clara. Below them, on the trail, a lone rider sat on a horse. The morning sun glinted off the badge on his chest. It was Deputy Tom Vance. He was not looking at the ground. He was looking up at the ridge, his pistol drawn. He had guessed where they would go. "Stop!" Vance shouted, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Do not move!" Clara's heart hammered. "It is Tom," she whispered to Yazzie. "He is a good man. He warned me." "A good man who follows a bad order is dangerous," Yazzie said low in his throat. Clara stepped forward, raising her hands. "Tom, it is me. We found it. We found the weapons. You do not have to do this." Vance's hand wavered. He looked tired, his young face haggard. "Miss Rowe, please, put your hands up. The sheriff, he told me to shoot on sight. He said you were armed and dangerous." "I am armed with the truth, Tom," Clara shouted. "Look at what they are doing. They are going to start a war. Do you want that blood on your hands?" Vance lowered the gun slightly. He looked torn, his loyalty to the badge fighting with his conscience. "He has the girl, Clara. He has Lila. If I let you go, he will hurt her." "If you take us in, he kills us all," Yazzie said, stepping out from behind Clara. He did not raise his hands. He stood tall, a warrior facing his enemy. Vance jerked the gun back up, aiming it at Yazzie's chest. "Stay back. Indy and I will shoot." "Tom, no!" Clara screamed. She pulled Mrs. Hawthorne's revolver from her belt. She did not look at the gun. She looked at the target. She looked at the fear in Tom Vance's eyes. "Drop it, Tom," she said, her voice steady, cold as the morning air. "Do not make me choose between you and the truth." Vance stared at her, the schoolteacher, covered in red dust, holding a gun with a hand that no longer shook. He saw the change in her. The town had tried to break her, but they had only hammered her into steel. The standoff stretched, the tension pulling tight as a bowstring. The sun crested the horizon, blinding and indifferent. And, in the distance, the sound of more hooves began to thunder against the earth. The sheriff's posse was coming. Vance looked at the dust cloud rising in the distance, then back at Clara. He slowly lowered the hammer of his gun. "Go," he croaked. "Go now, before I change my mind. Clara lowered her weapon.
Thank you, Tom.
Do not thank me, he said, turning his horse away.
Just run. Run like hell.
Yazzie grabbed Clara's arm. Come, the hunt is on. They turned and ran into the maze of the canyons, leaving the road and the law behind them. But as they ran, Clara knew one thing for certain: she was done running away. She was just moving to higher ground to make her stand. The sun was a white-hot hammer beating down on the dust of the town square. It was high noon, the hour when shadows vanished and sins were supposed to be laid bare. But in Copper Creek, the light only served to illuminate the grotesque theater of morality that Reverend Amos Pike had constructed. Clara May Rowe stood in the center of the square. She was not the pristine schoolteacher who had rung the bell 3 days ago. Her dress was torn at the hem, stained with the red clay of the canyons. Her hair, usually pinned back with severe precision, hung in loose, matted strands around her face. Her hands were bound in front of her with rough hemp rope. She had been run to ground 2 miles outside of town, separated from Yazzie in the maze of the slot canyons when the sheriff's posse had cut them off. To save her, Yazzie had drawn the fire of 3 deputies and vanished into the rocks. Clara had surrendered when Wade Cutler had ridden up, dragging a terrified Lila Benton behind his horse, and offered a trade. It had been a lie. Of course, Cutler had taken Clara, but he had not released Lila. Now, the girl was locked in the jailhouse, while Clara was put on display like a prize heifer at a county fair. A circle of men stood around her: miners, shopkeepers, ranch hands. Behind them stood the women, their faces pinched with a mixture of disgust and dark fascination. They jeered and whispered, their voices sounding like dry leaves skittering over stone. "Look at her! Mrs.!" Miller shouted from the boardwalk. "Filth, bringing shame to decent women." "Indian lover," a man spat, sending a stream of tobacco juice into the dust near Clara's boots. Clara did not flinch. She kept her head high, her eyes fixed on the wooden platform that had been hastily erected in front of the church. Sheriff Wade Cutler stood there, leaning against a post, his thumbs hooked in his gun belt. He looked bored, but his eyes were alert, scanning the crowd, ensuring the mood remained angry but controlled. Beside him stood Reverend Amos Pike, holding a black Bible that looked too heavy for his narrow hands. Silence. Pike's voice boomed out, practiced and theatrical. The crowd quieted, though the undercurrent of murmuring remained. "We are gathered here not in anger, but in sorrow," Pike began, his voice dripping with false piety. "We entrusted our children to this woman. We entrusted the future of Copper Creek to her guidance. And how has she repaid us?" He pointed a shaking finger at Clara. "She has consorted with savages. She has abandoned the laws of God and man to run wild in the desert with heathens. She has brought scandal to our doorstep and endangered the souls of the innocent." "I did no such thing." Clara's voice was hoarse from thirst, but it cut through the heavy air. "I went to the quarry. I found the crates Sheriff Cutler is smuggling dynamite and rifles to frame the Navjo. He is the criminal, not me." The crowd laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound. They did not want the truth. The truth was complicated and uncomfortable. The truth meant admitting that their prosperity was built on theft. A fallen woman, however, was a simple story. It was a story they could understand. "She speaks with the tongue of the serpent," Pike shouted, drowning her out. "She lies to cover her sin. We have witnesses who saw her entering the ice house. We have witnesses who saw her riding with the tracker. Yazzie be gay, in the dead of night." "Is it a sin to survive?" Clara shouted back, struggling against the ropes. "Is it a sin to stop a theft? Ask the sheriff about the ledger. Ask him about the money from the mining company." Cutler pushed himself off the post and walked to the edge of the platform. He smiled, a cold, predatory tightening of his lips. "The ledger is gone. Miss Rowe, buried in the sand where we caught you. And as for your accusations, well, the heat makes people imagine strange things. It is clear to everyone here that you are hysterical, perhaps mad." He looked out at the crowd. "The question is, what do we do with a woman who has lost her way so completely? We cannot let her teach our children. We cannot let her stay in decent society. "Run her out," a man shouted. "Tar and feather her," another cried. The mob surged forward slightly. The violence was palpable. A static charge building before lightning strikes. Clara felt a cold knot of terror in her stomach. They were going to kill her. Not quickly, and not cleanly. They were going to tear her apart, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but a warning to anyone else who dared to speak up. She looked around for a friendly face. Mrs. Hawthorne was standing near the dress shop, weeping into her handkerchief, held back by two large miners. Deputy Tom Vance was nowhere to be seen. "Kneel," Pike commanded. "Kneel and beg for the forgiveness of this town." "I will not," Clara said. Her legs were trembling, but she locked her knees. "I have done nothing to be ashamed of." "Then we will make you ashamed," Cutler said softly. He signaled to two of his deputies. "Bring the shears. If she wants to live like a savage, let us cut her hair like a convict so everyone knows what she is." The deputies stepped forward. One of them produced a large pair of sheep shears, the metal glinting in the sun. The crowd roared its approval. Clara closed her eyes. She would not scream. She promised herself she would not give them the satisfaction of a scream. Then, the ground began to shake. It was not an earthquake. It was the rhythmic, thundering percussion of hooves hitting hard-packed earth at a full gallop. The sound tore through the jeering of the crowd. Heads turned. The deputies with the shears froze. From the southern end of the main street, a horse exploded through the cloud of dust. It was a paint stallion, its coat streaked with sweat and foam. Moving with terrifying speed, the rider leaned low over the neck, a blur of motion. "Stop him!" Cutler shouted, his hand going to his gun. But the crowd was too thick, and the rider was too fast. He did not slow down. He drove the horse straight into the mass of people. Men scrambled back, falling over each other to avoid the crushing hooves. The horse reared as it reached the center of the circle, its front legs pawing the air, creating a wall of muscle and fury between Clara and the deputies. The rider hit the ground before the horse had even settled. He landed on his feet, dust swirling around his boots in a vortex. It was Yazzie Bigay. He did not look like a scout today. He looked like a war chief. He had stripped off his white man's shirt. His chest was painted with streaks of yellow and black clay. A repeating rifle was slung across his back, but his hands were empty. He stood directly in front of Clara, placing his body between her and the sheriff. The silence that fell over the square was absolute. Yazzie did not look at Cutler. He did not look at Pike. He turned his back on them, facing Clara. His eyes were dark pools of intensity, burning with a fire she had never seen before. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving, sweat tracking through the clay paint. He leaned in close, his face inches from hers. The smell of him sage, horse sweat, and danger filled her senses, drowning out the stench of the mob. "Trust me," he whispered. His voice was a low rumble, meant for her alone. "If you want to live, and if you want to save the girl, nod." Clara looked at him. She saw the calculation in his eyes. He was not just reacting. He was executing a plan. A desperate, insane plan. She nodded. Yazzie moved with the speed of a striking snake. He reached out and grabbed the front of her torn dress, pulling her roughly toward him. It was not a gentle embrace. It was a seizure. He crashed his mouth down onto hers. It was not a kiss of romance. It was hard, bruising, and possessive. It tasted of salt and iron. It was a physical shock that jolted through her entire body, freezing her in place. His hand tangled in her matted hair, tilting her head back, forcing the town to see. He was claiming her. He was branding her. For a moment, Clara's mind went blank. Then, instinct took over. She did not pull away. She leaned into him, her bound hands pressing against his bare chest, feeling the frantic rhythm of his heart beating against her palms. Yazzie broke the kiss as abruptly as he had started it. He did not let her go. He kept one arm clamped around her waist, holding her against his side like a shield or a trophy. He turned to face the crowd. His eyes swept over the men, daring them to move. "She is my wife," Yazzie roared. His voice carried to the back of the square, deep and resonant. A gasp went through the crowd. Reverend Pike looked as if he had been slapped. "She belongs to me," Yazzie continued, his hand resting conspicuously on the handle of the knife at his belt. "By the laws of the Dine and by the laws of the earth, touch her, and you touch me. Touch her, and you declare war on every Navajo in this territory." The crowd wavered. The logic of the frontier was brutal but simple. A woman without a man was public property, fair game for judgment. But a woman claimed a woman who belonged to a warrior. That was a property dispute. That was a matter of blood feud, and though they hated him, they feared him. They knew the Apache and the Navajo did not fight like white men. They fought at night. They fought with fire and silence. "This is blasphemy," Reverend Pike shrieked, his face turning purple. "She is a white woman, a Christian woman. You cannot claim her." "She has no family here," Yazzie said, his voice cold steel. "The town cast her out. You threw her away. I picked her up. She is mine." Sheriff Cutler stepped forward, his gun drawn now. "I do not care about your savage marriage customs. Yazzie, she is a criminal. She broke into the ice house. She is under arrest." Yazzie did not flinch. "And I have your ledger. Sheriff." Cutler froze. "Not the one she carried," Yazzie said, bluffing with a confidence that stopped the sheriff's heart. "The pages she tore out before you caught her. My cousin has them. If I do not walk out of here with my wife, if the girl Lila Benton is not released, those pages go to the United States Marshal in Tucson by sunset." It was a lie. Clara knew it was a lie. She had not torn any pages, but Cutler did not know that, and the doubt flickered in his eyes. "You are bluffing," Cutler snarled. "Am I?" Yazzie asked. "Are you willing to bet your neck on it? Wade, are you willing to hang for a few crates of dynamite?" The tension in the square was pulled so tight it hummed. The crowd looked from the sheriff to the warrior. They sensed the shift in power. "Release the girl," Yazzie commanded. "Release my cousin Hostine, or tonight, the water will not be peaceful. Tonight, the mines will burn." Cutler looked at the crowd. He saw the fear in their eyes. If he started a shooting war right here, in the middle of the square, with women and children present, he would lose control of the town. "Bring the girl," Cutler spat at a deputy. Minutes later, the door to the jailhouse opened. Lila Benton stumbled out, pale and shaking, but alive. Deputy Tom Vance was behind her. He caught Clara's eye and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "Take them," Cutler said, his voice low and venomous. "Take your whore and get out. But if I see either of you within 10 miles of Copper Creek again, I will shoot you down like dogs." "We are leaving," Yazzie said. He whistled, and his horse trotted to his side. He lifted Clara effortlessly, swinging her up behind the saddle. He cut the ropes on her wrists with a swift motion of his knife. Then he vaulted up in front of her. "Hold on," he said. Clara wrapped her arms around his waist. Her skin burned where it touched his bare back. Yazzie kicked the horse into a gallop. They tore out of the square, past the stunned reverend, past the furious sheriff, and past the silent, shamed faces of the townspeople. As they passed the saloon, chaos erupted. Mrs. Hawthorne, seeing her chance to aid the retreat, knocked over a stack of whiskey barrels on the boardwalk. The heavy casks rolled into the street, causing the deputies' horses to rear and panic. In the confusion, Tom Vance accidentally dropped his rifle, blocking the path of the men trying to mount a pursuit. Clara buried her face in Yazzie's back, squeezing her eyes shut as the wind whipped her hair. They were moving fast, leaving the town behind, heading for the open, broken land of the mesas. They rode for an hour without stopping, pushing the horse hard until the red dust of Copper Creek was just a haze on the horizon. Yazzie guided them up a steep, narrow trail that led to a high plateau, a place where the rock formed a natural fortress against the world below. Only when they were safely in the shadow of a towering sandstone spire did Yazzie rein the horse in. He slid off and reached up to help Clara down. Her legs gave way as her feet touched the ground. Yazzie caught her, his hands gripping her upper arms to steady her. For a long moment, they just stood there. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a shaking exhaustion. Clara looked up at him. The war paint on his face was streaked with sweat. His chest was heaving. She raised a trembling hand and touched her lips. They felt bruised, swollen. The memory of the kiss, the sheer, overwhelming force of it was still vibrating through her nerves. "You called me your wife," she whispered. Yazzie let go of her arms and stepped back. He turned away, picking up the canteen from his saddle and taking a long drink before handing it to her. "It was the only way," he said. His voice was flat, practical. "They would have shaved your head, they would have whipped you. But they will not touch another man's property, not when they are afraid of him." "Property," Clara repeated. The word tasted bitter, but she knew he was right. In the eyes of the law, in the eyes of the church, she was nothing. As his wife, she was something, even if that something was hated. "It was a tactic," Yazzie said, looking out over the canyon. "Do not mistake it for anything else." Clara took the canteen. She drank, the water cool and sweet against her parched throat. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. She looked at his broad back, at the muscles tensed beneath the copper skin. She remembered the heat of his body against hers in the square. She remembered the way he had looked at the mob like a wolf defending its mate. "A tactic," she said softly. But as she touched her lips again, a confusion swirled in her chest. It was fear, yes, and gratitude. But beneath that was an ember of something else, something dangerous. She was angry that he had to claim her to save her. She was angry that her own value was zero until a man put his name on her. But more terrifying than the anger was the realization that when he had kissed her, when he had pulled her against him, she had not wanted to pull away. "Thank you," she said, the words stiff. Yazzie turned back to look at her. His eyes searched her face, stripping away the layers of defense she tried to maintain. "Do not thank me yet," he said. "We bought time, but we did not buy safety. Cutler will come, and this time, he will bring the army." He walked over to a small overhang and began to gather dry wood for a fire. "Rest," he commanded. "Tonight we sleep. Tomorrow, we finish this." Clara sat down on a flat rock. She watched him work, the husband she had acquired in a dusty square to save her life. She realized with a jolt that she was no longer the schoolteacher of Copper Creek. That woman had died in the square. The woman who sat on the mesa was something new, something forged in shame and fire. And she belonged to no one but herself, no matter what the warrior said. Or so she told herself, as the ghost of his kiss lingered on her mouth like a burn. The sky over the canyon did not darken gradually. It bruised. The white heat of the afternoon collapsed under the weight of a sudden, violent low-pressure front pushing up from the Gulf, turning the air the color of old iron. Clara, Yazzie, and Lila rode hard toward the jagged mouth of the slot canyon known as Devil's Gullet. The horses were foaming, their hooves striking sparks against the flinty ground. Behind them, a mile back but closing fast, was the dust cloud of Sheriff Wade Cutler's posse. "The rain is coming!" Yazzie shouted over the rising wind. He favored his left side, riding with a grim determination. "We must reach the high ground past the narrows before the water hits. If we are caught in the bottom, the flood will take us. And if we stay on the ridge, the rifles will take us," Clara yelled back. She was no longer the woman who had fainted at the sight of blood. The red dust of the chase coated her face, masking her fear, leaving only her eyes visible, sharp, and alert. They hit the entrance of the canyon just as the heavens tore open. It was not rain. It was a deluge. Water fell in sheets so thick it was difficult to breathe, instantly turning the dry wash into a slick, treacherous path of mud and oil. "Up," Yazzie commanded, pointing toward a narrow goat trail that switchbacked up the canyon wall toward an abandoned relay station. "Go!" They scrambled up the slope, the horses slipping and scrabbling for purchase. A crack of thunder shook the earth, masking the sharp crack-crack of rifle fire from below. A bullet struck the rock inches from Clara's head, spraying stone shards into her cheek.
"They are here!"
Lila screamed, her voice thin with terror. Yazzie pulled his horse around, positioning himself between the women and the canyon floor. He raised his Winchester, aiming through the blinding rain.
"Keep climbing! Do not stop!"
He fired, working the lever of his rifle with a fluid, deadly rhythm. Below, the dark shapes of Cutler's men were dismounting, using the boulders for cover. Clara whipped her horse, urging the frightened animal up the last steep incline. She reached the flat plateau of the relay station, a crumbling adobe shack with a sagging roof. A relic from the days before the railroad made the stage line obsolete. A single telegraph wire, singing in the wind, stretched from a pole near the shack, disappearing into the storm. She slid from the saddle and pulled Lila down.
"Get inside, stay low."
She turned back to the edge of the cliff. Yazzie was still halfway down, trading fire with 5 men. He was holding them back, buying seconds with inches of ground. Then, Clara saw it. A deputy, braced against a mesquite bush, took careful aim.
"Yazzie!"
she screamed. The warning came too late. The bullet took Yazzie high in the chest, spinning him around. He nearly fell from the saddle, but grabbed the horn with a desperate strength. He spurred his horse, driving the animal up the slick trail as blood bloomed dark and fast on his shirt. Clara did not think. She did not weigh the moral implications of violence. She pulled misses, Hawthorne's heavy revolver from her belt. She braced her arm against a fence post, just as Yazzie had taught her in the ice house, squeeze like pulling a thread. She fired. The recoil jarred her shoulder, but the bullet kicked up mud right at the feet of the deputy who had shot Yazzie. The man flinched and ducked. It was enough. Yazzie cleared the ridge. His horse collapsed, its lungs blown, throwing him onto the muddy ground. Clara was there in an instant, dragging him by his good arm toward the shelter of the adobe shack. Lila, "Help me!" Together, they pulled the heavy weight of the warrior inside and kicked the rotting door shut, barring it with a broken table leg. The interior was dim, smelling of wet earth and ancient rats. Rain hammered on the roof like 1,000 fists. Clara knelt beside Yazzie. The wound was just below his collarbone. It was bleeding sluggishly, but his skin was gray.
"You shot back,"
Yazzie rasped, a faint, bloody smile touching his lips.
"You aim high."
"I was aiming for his head," Clara said, her voice trembling as she pressed her scarf against the wound. "Lila, tear your petticoat. We need bandages."
"The wire,"
Yazzie whispered, gripping Clara's wrist. His hand was hot.
"The wire. Is it live?"
Clara looked at the corner of the room. There, on a dusty table, sat a telegraph key. It was old, corroded, but the wires running through the wall seemed intact. The mining company kept these lines for emergencies. She rushed to the table and pressed the key. A sharp click-clack echoed in the room. The circuit was closed. It had power.
"I know the alphabet," Clara said, her heart pounding. "My father taught me." "Send it," Yazzie groaned. "Send it all."
Outside, the gunfire intensified. Splinters of wood exploded inward as bullets chewed through the adobe walls. Lila curled into a ball in the corner, sobbing. Clara stood at the key. She forced her hand to be steady. ... To Territorial Marshal Tucson, stop urgent. Stop Sheriff Cutler smuggling arms. Stop attacking civilians at Devil Gullet. Stop, have ledger proof. Stop, send help. Stop. She repeated the message. Then she sent it to the Arizona Star office in Prescott. She tapped until her fingers were numb, until the sound of the brass key became a prayer for salvation. Suddenly, the door shattered inward. Sheriff Wade Cutler stood in the frame, water streaming from the brim of his hat. He looked like a demon, his eyes wild, his fine suit plastered to his body. Behind him stood Reverend Pike, clutching a rifle like a talisman, and 2 deputies. "Enough," Cutler roared. He leveled his pistol at Clara. "Step away from that machine. Schoolteacher." Clara raised her hands slowly. "It is too late, Wade. The message is gone. The marshal knows." The marshal is 3 days' ride away, Cutler sneered, stepping into the room. By the time he gets here, the Apaches will be blamed for burning the station and killing everyone inside. A tragic massacre. He looked at Yazzie, who was trying to push himself up, his knife in his hand. Cutler kicked the wounded man in the ribs. Yazzie groaned and collapsed. "Stop!" Clara screamed, lunging forward. A deputy caught her, twisting her arm behind her back. Cutler looked around the room. His eyes landed on Lila. He grabbed the girl by her hair, dragging her to her feet. He pressed the cold barrel of his Colt against her temple. "The ledger," Cutler said. His voice was dangerously quiet. "Give me the book, Clara, or the girl dies first. Then the Indian. Then you." Clara froze. The satchel was at her feet. Inside was the damning evidence. "If I give it to you," Clara said, "you will kill us anyway." "Maybe," Cutler shrugged. "But maybe I will let the girl go. She is young. She can be re-educated." Lila was weeping silently, her eyes pleading with Clara. Clara looked at Yazzie. He was watching her. He did not look afraid. He looked at her with a profound stillness. "Do not," Yazzie whispered. "Clara, you teach the children that the truth is the only thing that matters. Live as you teach." It was a terrible burden he placed on her, to choose the abstract concept of justice over the immediate life of a child. But Clara knew Wade Cutler. She knew that a man who would starve a tribe for water would not hesitate to slit a throat to save his own skin. She looked at the satchel. Then she looked at the table where a stack of old-school primers lay, wrapped in oilcloth to protect them from the leaks in the roof. They were the same size as the ledger. She had to gamble everything on the arrogance of a man who thought he had already won. "Fine," Clara said. Her voice was ice. "Let her go. I will give you the book." "Throw it," Cutler commanded. Clara kicked the satchel aside. She reached for the oilcloth-wrapped bundle on the table, the one containing McGuffey's second eclectic reader. "Here," she said. She tossed the bundle toward him. Cutler caught it with his free hand. His eyes flicked down to the package. In that split second of distraction, the balance of the room shifted. "Now, Tom!" Clara screamed. She was not speaking to the deputies in the room. She was speaking to the shadow in the doorway behind them. Deputy Tom Vance had not entered with the others. He had been guarding the rear. Now, he stepped into the light. He did not aim at Clara. He aimed at the sheriff. Bang! The shot was deafening in the small space. Cutler's gun exploded from his hand, spinning across the floor. He howled in pain, clutching his shattered fingers. Lila dropped to the floor, scrambling away. "Treason!" Pike screamed, raising his rifle. Yazzie, summoning the last of his strength, threw his knife. It did not kill the Reverend, but it buried itself in his thigh. Pike shrieked and fell, his shot going wild into the ceiling. "Get down!" Vance shouted, tackling the other deputy. Clara dived for Cutler's fallen gun. She brought it up just as the sheriff pulled a second pistol from his boot. They faced each other, the schoolteacher and the tyrant. "You are nothing," Cutler spat, blood flying from his hand. "You are a whore and a traitor." "And you," Clara said, her finger tightening on the trigger, "are finished." Before either could fire, a roar louder than the gunfire swallowed the world. The flash flood had arrived. It hit the canyon below with the force of a locomotive, a wall of brown water, uprooted trees, and boulders. The ground shook violently. The sound was so immense it stopped the fight. And through the noise of the water, a new sound cut through. A bugle. Clara glanced out the shattered window. On the far ridge, silhouetted against the storm clouds, was a line of riders. They wore slickers, but the badges on their chests caught the gray light. The territorial rangers. They had not been 3 days away. They had been patrolling the mining district, alerted by the suspicion of the missing explosives. The telegraph had merely told them exactly where to strike. "Drop it, Wade," Vance shouted, holding the other deputy in a chokehold. "It is over. Look outside." Cutler looked. He saw the rangers descending the far trail. He saw the floodwaters churning below, cutting off his escape. He saw the ruin of his empire. He dropped the gun. He sank to his knees, clutching his bleeding hand, his face gray and defeated. Clara did not lower her weapon until the first ranger kicked open the door. The aftermath was a blur of motion and noise. The rangers secured the prisoners. Reverend Pike was weeping, confessing his sins to anyone who would listen. Cutler was silent, staring at the wall with dead eyes. A ranger medic was tending to Yazzie. Clara sat on the floor, the adrenaline draining out of her, leaving her shaking and cold. She watched the medic cut away Yazzie's shirt to bind the wound. "He is lucky, ma'am," the medic said, looking up at Clara. "Through and through. Missed the lung. He is tough as old leather." Clara crawled over to him. Yazzie's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow but steady. She reached out and took his hand. It was stained with dirt and blood, but it was warm. He opened his eyes. The fierce warrior was gone, replaced by the man who had watched her from the livery stable. "We did it," he whispered. "The water is safe." "You almost died," Clara said, tears finally spilling over, cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "You foolish, stubborn man." "I had to protect my wife," he murmured, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. Clara squeezed his hand. She looked around the room. She saw Lila safe in Vance's care. She saw the law of the town in chains. She saw the real ledger, still safe in her satchel. She looked back at Yazzie. The tactic was over. The danger had passed. She could walk away now. She could go back to being Miss Rowe, the victim of circumstance. But she looked at the blood on his chest, blood spilled for her. She looked at the silver concos on his belt. She leaned down, brushing the hair from his forehead. "Yazzie," she said, her voice clear and strong amidst the chaos of the room. "Yes, that thing you said in the square, about me being yours." He tensed slightly, waiting for her to reject it, to ask for her freedom back. "It was a good tactic," she whispered, her lips brushing his ear. "But let us be clear on one thing." She pulled back so she could look him in the eye. "I do not need a tactic anymore. I do not need a shield. I am choosing this. I am choosing you." Yazzie stared at her. For the first time, he looked vulnerable. "Clara, the town will never let you forget." "Let them remember," Clara said fiercely. "Let them remember that when the storm came, I did not run, and I did not stand alone." She bent down and kissed him. It was not the brutal kiss of the square. It was soft, lingering, and full of a promise that was stronger than any wedding vow spoken in Reverend Pike's church. Outside, the rain began to slow. The floodwaters rushed on, carrying the debris of the past down toward the river, leaving the canyon scoured clean. The silence that descended upon Copper Creek after the arrest of Sheriff Wade Cutler was not a peaceful silence. It was the stunned, suffocating quiet of a hive that had lost its queen. The territorial rangers had taken Cutler, Reverend Pike, and the corrupt deputies away in a wagon heavily guarded by men with Winchesters. The floodwaters had receded, leaving the canyon scoured clean, but the town itself was left covered in the mud of its own complicity. Clara stood on the porch of the dress shop 2 days after the raid. Her arm was in a sling, a souvenir from the rough handling in the canyon, and her face still bore the faint scratches of the sandstone. She watched the townspeople moving about their business with their heads down. They walked quickly, avoiding eye contact, terrified that the rangers might return and find more names in the ledger. Mrs. Miller. The baker's wife, the same woman who had screamed filth at Clara in the square, approached the porch. She carried a basket covered with a checkered cloth. She stopped at the bottom of the steps, shifting her weight from foot to foot, her face a mask of forced contrition. "Miss Rowe." "Mrs. Miller said, her voice high and brittle. We heard you were back. The Ladies' Aid Society wanted to send over some fresh bread and a jar of peach preserves." Clara did not move to take the basket. She looked at the woman, remembering the hate in her eyes just 48 hours ago. "Peach preserves," Clara repeated flatly. "Is that the price of a conscience in Copper Creek?" "Mrs. Miller." "A jar of fruit." "Mrs. Miller flushed a deep crimson. Now, Clara, there is no need to be uncharitable. We were deceived. Sheriff Cutler, he told us terrible things. We were trying to protect the town. You were trying to protect your comfort, Clara said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. You saw a 17-year-old girl dragged through the streets, and you cheered. You saw a woman bound and humiliated, and you called for shears to cut her hair. That was not deception. Mrs. Miller, that was cruelty. We are willing to let bygones be bygones. Mrs. Miller said, her tone stiffening defensively. The school needs a teacher. We are willing to reinstate you. With full back pay, of course, $30. Clara laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You think I want your money. You think you can buy my silence so you can sleep at night. She stepped down one step, causing Mrs. Miller to retreat. I do not want your bread. I do not want your reinstatement. If you want to make amends, you will go to the livery stable. You will find Thomas, the Navjo boy you allowed your sons to beat in the schoolyard. You will apologize to him, and then you will go to the jailhouse, which is now empty, and you will apologize to Lila Benton for watching while a gun was held to her head. Mrs. Miller gasped, clutching her basket. Apologize to an Indian, and that Benton girl, she stole mail. She stole the truth, Clara said, and the boy is a child. If you cannot find the humanity to do that, then do not step onto this porch again. Mrs. Miller turned and fled, muttering about ingratitude and uppity women. Clara watched her go. She felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Mrs. Hawthorne, looking tired but proud. You made an enemy there, Mrs. Hawthorne warned softly. She will not forgive you for being right. I am done trying to be forgiven for sins I did not commit. Martha, Clara said. She looked out at the street. A miner walked by, spitting on the ground as he passed her. He did not say the word traitor loud enough for her to hear, but she saw his lips form the shape of it. Cutler was gone, but the poison he had poured into the well of the town was still there. They hated Clara now not because she was a fallen woman, but because she was a mirror. When they looked at her, they saw their own cowardice, and they hated her for it. I cannot stay here tonight, Clara said, turning to Mrs. Hawthorne. I feel the walls closing in. Where will you go? To the only place where I was not judged, Clara said. Yazzie came for her at dusk. He rode a fresh horse, leading a mare for her. His chest was bandaged heavily under his shirt, and he moved with a stiffness that betrayed his pain. But he sat in the saddle with the same upright dignity as always. They rode out of town without fanfare. No one stopped them. The townspeople watched from behind curtains, relieved to see the troublemakers leave. They headed south, away from the silver mines and the white settlements, climbing higher into the mesas where the air was thin and smelled of pine resin and ancient dust. It took 4 hours to reach the winter camp of his family. It was not a village in the way Clara understood it. It was a cluster of Hogan's octagonal structures made of logs and earth nestled against a cliff face that protected them from the wind. Sheep were penned in a brush corral, bleating softly in the darkness. An old woman was waiting by the fire. She was tiny, her skin a map of 1,000 wrinkles, her hair white as untouched snow tied in a heavy knot at the back of her neck. This was Grandmother Naashji. Clara hesitated, standing by her horse. She was a white woman, a Bilagana, entering the heart of the world she'd been accused of conspiring with. Yazzie dismounted and spoke to the old woman in his own tongue. The language was fluid, rhythmic, like water flowing over stones. Grandmother Naashji looked at Clara. Her eyes were black and sharp, missing nothing. She did not smile. She did not rush forward with greetings. She simply nodded and gestured to the fire. She says there is stew, Yazzie translated. And she says you look like a bird that has flown into a window, stunned and ruffling your feathers. Clara let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Tell her thank you. For the next week, Clara lived in a world that operated on an entirely different axis from Copper Creek. Time here was not measured by the school bell or the factory whistle. It was measured by the sun, the needs of the sheep, and the slow, deliberate work of survival. She expected to be treated as a guest, or perhaps a prisoner. Instead, she was treated as a pair of hands. Grandmother Naashjai did not coddle her. On the second day, she handed Clara a basket of yucca root and pointed to a flat stone. She mimed the motion of pounding. Clara pounded, her hands blistered, and her shoulders ached. But the old woman nodded approval when the fibers were stripped clean. Clara helped dress Yazi's wound. The bullet had passed through cleanly, but the risk of infection was high. She used the medical knowledge she had gained from her father's books, combined with the poultices of sage and pitch that grandmother prepared. It was during these quiet hours, kneeling beside him on the sheepskins, that Clara began to learn the living language of the place. Respect here was not a hat tipped in the street. It was not a title like sheriff or reverend. Respect was the way Yazi's cousin, Hosteen, brought her water without being asked because he saw she was working hard. It was the way the children stopped running when grandmother raised a single finger. It was the way they never interrupted one another, allowing silence to exist in a conversation as a space for thought. One afternoon, Clara was sitting under a juniper tree, trying to teach 3 small children the alphabet using a stick in the dirt. "A," she said, drawing the shape. "Apple?" The children giggled. They did not know what an apple was. They had never seen one. "Bila sana," Yazi's voice came from behind her. Clara turned. He was leaning against the tree, looking stronger than he had in days. "Bila sana," the children repeated in chorus. "Apple," Clara said, correcting herself. "It is a fruit, red, sweet." Yazi sat down next to her, wincing slightly. "You are teaching them words for things they cannot eat and cannot hold. Teach them stone, teach them sky, teach them words that keep them alive." "I am teaching them to read," Clara defended, "so that when they see a contract or a treaty, they know what they are signing." Yazi looked at her, his expression softening. "You are always fighting. Clara, even when you sit in the dirt, you are fighting a war." "I do not know how to stop," she admitted. "If I stop, I feel like the town wins. I feel like the lies become true. The town is far away," Yazi said. He picked up a handful of red dirt and let it sift through his fingers. "Here, you are just a woman." "Is that not enough?" Clara watched the dust fall. "I do not know. In the town, being just a woman means being property, or being a victim. Not here," Yazi said. He looked at her directly. "Here, a woman owns the home. She owns the sheep. The line of the family runs through her blood, not the man's. If a husband displeases his wife, she puts his saddle outside the door, and he must leave. She has the power." Clara looked at Grandmother Naashjai, who was weaving at a loom nearby. The old woman looked frail, but there was an iron strength in her posture. She was the center of this universe. "I did not know that," Clara whispered. "There is much you do not know," Yazi said. "But you learn fast." The conflict within Clara grew with each passing day. The peace of the mesa was seductive. No one judged her past. No one whispered about her virtue. She could stay here. She could learn the language, help with the children, and disappear from the white world that had rejected her. It would be a hard life, but it would be an honest one. But every time she looked at the ledger, which she kept wrapped in her bag, she remembered the faces of her students in Copper Creek. She remembered the way Mrs. Miller had looked frightened and entrenched in her ignorance. If she stayed here, she saved herself. But she left the town to rot in its own prejudice. She left the next generation of children, white and Navajo alike, to grow up believing that hate was a virtue. One evening, as the sun was setting and painting the canyon walls in violent shades of violet and orange, Clara walked to the edge of the mesa. Yazi followed her. They stood in silence for a long time, watching a hawk circle the thermals. "You are restless," Yazi said. "Your spirit is pacing like a wolf in a cage." "I am thinking about the school," Clara said. "I am thinking about the bell." "You want to go back?" "I do not want to go back to the way it was," Clara said fiercely. I do not want to be the meek schoolteacher who hides in the dress shop. But if I do not go back, who teaches them that savage is a lie, who teaches them that the water belongs to everyone? Yazzie turned to face her. The wind caught his dark hair. He looked every inch the warrior, but his eyes were gentle. Clara, he said. He reached out and took her hand. His touch was warm, familiar now. We need to speak of the square. Clara's breath hitched. They had not spoken of it. The kiss, the claim. She is my wife. You did what you had to do, Clara said quickly. You saved my life. I am grateful. I will always be grateful. It was a tactic, Yazzie said, repeating the words he had used in the canyon. To stop the sheriff. To make them fear the consequences of touching you. I know. But, Yazzie continued, stepping closer, invading her space in that slow, deliberate way that made her heart hammer. A tactic changes when the heart changes. He looked down at her, his thumb tracing the line of her knuckles. When I pulled you onto my horse, when I felt you holding me, it stopped being a tactic for me. I did not want to save a schoolteacher. I wanted to save you. Clara looked up at him, her throat tight. Yazzie. But I am not Wade Cutler, he said firmly. I do not take what is not given. I do not own people. In the square, I took your voice away to save your life. I made you mine without asking. He let go of her hand. He stepped back, putting a foot of distance between them. I release you, he said. The claim is gone. You are not my wife. You are Clara May Rowe. You are free. Clara felt a sudden, sharp pang of loss. You are sending me away. No, Yazzie said intensely. I am giving you the choice. I do not want you to stay because you are grateful. I do not want you to stay because you have nowhere else to go. I do not want a debt. Clara, I want a choice. He looked at her with a raw vulnerability that took her breath away. If you stand by my side, I want it to be because you walked there yourself, not because I pulled you. Clara looked at him, this man who had risked death for her, who had challenged an entire town for her. He was offering her the one thing no man in Copper Creek had ever offered her: full, absolute agency. He was willing to lose her rather than keep her as a captive of circumstance. That is a dangerous thing to offer a woman, Clara whispered. She might surprise you. I am counting on it, Yazzie said. A small smile touched the corner of his mouth. The next morning, a rider appeared at the base of the trail. It was Deputy Tom Vance, and riding with him, looking dusty and determined, was Lila Benton. Clara ran down the trail to meet them. Lila practically fell off her horse into Clara's arms. Miss Rowe, you are safe, Lila cried, hugging her tight. I am safe. Lila, are you hurt? Did they... I am fine, Lila said. Pulling back, she looked older, harder. The baby fat was gone from her face. Tom, Deputy Vance has been looking out for me. My father is... well, he is ashamed. He is drinking a lot, but he is leaving me alone. The town is a mess, Vance said, tipping his hat to Yazzie, who stood a few paces back. The two men exchanged a nod of mutual respect, the soldier and the warrior. The new marshal is temporarily running things, but we need a council. We need order. Why did you come? Clara asked. Lila reached into her saddlebag and pulled out the brass school bell. It was dented on one side, as if it had been kicked. They threw this in the mud, Lila said. After you left, I picked it up. She held it out to Clara. The school is closed. Miss Rowe, Reverend Pike's replacement, some sour man from Prescott, says girls don't need history and Indians don't need reading. He kicked Thomas out. He told me I should focus on learning to sew. Lila's eyes filled with angry tears. You taught me to write my name, Miss Rowe. You taught me that the world is bigger than Copper Creek. Now you have to decide if you are going to let them make it small again. Clara took the bell. The brass was cold and heavy. She ran her thumb over the dent. They called me a traitor. Lila, they hate me. They fear you, Lila corrected. Because you won, and because you are free. Lila looked at Yazzie, then back at Clara. You taught me to write my name. Now you have to write your future. Whatever it is, but do not let them write it for you." Clara looked at the bell. She looked at the vast, open sky of the mesa. Then she looked at Yazzie. He was leaning against a rock, arms crossed, waiting. He would not tell her what to do. He would let her choose. Clara turned to Vance. "Tom, do you have a wagon coming up any time soon?" "I can bring one," Vance said. "Are you moving out, going to Tucson?" "No," Clara said. Her voice was steady, ringing clear in the thin air. "I am going back to Copper Creek." She looked at Yazzie. "I am going to reopen the school, but it will not be the school board's school anymore. It will be mine, and Thomas will sit in the front row, and any child who wants to learn will be welcome, regardless of who their father is or what language they speak at home." She walked over to Yazzie. "I have to go back," she said softly. "I have to finish the work. I cannot build a home on a foundation that is still rotten." Yazzie nodded slowly. There was sadness in his eyes, but also pride. "It will be a fight," he said. "I know," Clara said, "but I will not be fighting alone this time." "Will I?" "No," Yazzie said. "I will be there. I will be your shadow. I will be your shield when you need it. But you will be the spear." Clara smiled. It was a genuine smile, the first in a long time. "I am not going back to ask for their forgiveness, Yazzie. I am going back to educate them, and God help anyone who gets in my way." She turned back to Lila and Vance, clutching the dented bell. "Tell the town I am coming," Clara said. "Tell them school starts on Monday, and tell Mrs. Miller. Tell her I like my bread toasted." The decision was made. The falling action had settled into a resolve as hard as diamond. Clara was returning to the world of men, not as a victim, but as an architect of a new order. And the warrior who loved her would ride beside her, not as her owner, but as her equal. The return of Clara May Rowe to Copper Creek was not marked by a parade, nor was it hidden in the shadows of the night. It happened at high noon on a Monday, the sun sitting directly overhead, casting no shadows for anyone to hide within. She rode in a buckboard wagon driven by Deputy Tom Vance, sitting straight-backed on the wooden bench. Flanking the wagon were 2 United States territorial marshals, men with hard faces and badges that gleamed with the authority of the federal government. And riding point, 20 yards ahead, was Yazzie Begay. He did not look back. He rode his paint stallion with an easy, loose-rein confidence, his presence a silent declaration that the road belonged to him as much as it did to anyone else. The town was quiet. The saloon doors were still. The blacksmith's hammer was silent. People watched from windows and porches. They saw the woman they had shamed, the woman they had tried to crush, returning not with her head bowed in repentance, but with the law at her shoulder and a warrior at her vanguard. They did not stop at the schoolhouse. The school board, in a final act of petty spite, had changed the locks and boarded the windows, claiming renovations were needed. Clara directed Tom Vance to stop the wagon in front of the old freight office at the end of Main Street. It was a derelict building, abandoned when the Silver Spur line was moved, with peeling paint and a roof that had seen better days. But it was spacious, and more importantly, it was private property owned by Mrs. Hawthorne's late husband's estate. Clara stepped down from the wagon. She smoothed her skirt, a simple blue calico that Mrs. Hawthorne had mended for her. She walked to the back of the wagon and lifted a heavy object wrapped in burlap. She climbed the rotting steps of the freight office. She unwrapped the object. It was the brass bell. The side was dented where it had been kicked into the mud, a permanent scar of the town's ugly history. Clara hung the bell on an iron hook by the doorframe. She took a deep breath, the dry desert air filling her lungs. She reached up and rang it. Clang, clang, clang. The sound was not the pure, sweet chime of before. The dent made it deeper, slightly discordant, a rougher sound. It was no longer the sound of polite society. It was the sound of a reality that had been broken and put back together. It was the sound of truth. "School is in session," Clara said to the empty street. For a long minute, nothing happened. Then A door opened down the street. Lila Benton walked out, carrying a stack of books. She walked with her chin up, ignoring the stares of the men loitering in front of the barber shop. Then, from the direction of the livery stable, a small figure appeared. It was Thomas. He wore a clean shirt, and his hair was tied back neatly. He walked hesitantly at first, looking around for rocks or cruel words. Clara stood on the porch, waiting. She did not smile. She simply nodded. Acknowledgement. Respect. Thomas began to run. Behind him came 2 more Navajo children, cousins from the camp who had come down with Yazzie. And then, slowly, the door to the baker's shop opened. Mrs. Miller's youngest son, a boy of 8 who had always struggled with his letters, slipped out. He looked back at his mother in the doorway. She did not stop him. She looked at Clara, her face pale and unreadable, and then she turned away, letting the boy go. By the time the bell stopped ringing, there were 12 children standing in the dust before the old freight office, white faces and copper faces, children of miners and children of the dying. Clara looked at them. "Leave your hats on the hooks," she said, her voice steady. "And leave your parents' prejudices outside. In this room, we are only students." Yazzie did not come up the steps. He sat on his horse across the street, in the shade of a cottonwood tree. He rolled a cigarette, his eyes scanning the street, watching for trouble. He was the guardian of the gate, but he would not cross the threshold. He understood, with a wisdom that surpassed that of any educated man in Copper Creek, that this was Clara's kingdom. To enter it would be to diminish her authority. He stayed outside so she could stand tall inside. The weeks that followed were a slow, grinding reconstruction of the town's soul. Justice, when it came, was not the swift violence of a gunfight, but the slow, methodical turning of legal gears. Sheriff Wade Cutler was not hanged. That would have made him a martyr to the rougher elements of the territory. Instead, he was shackled and transported to the territorial prison in Yuma, a place of heat and stone where men broke rocks until their spirits turned to dust. The trial had been short. The ledger Clara had saved, combined with the testimony of Lila Benton and the sheer volume of explosives found at the quarry, left no room for defense. Reverend Amos Pike fared little better. He was not imprisoned, but he was destroyed. The church synod, alerted by the marshal to his involvement in the smuggling ring and his abuse of authority, stripped him of his position. He was defrocked publicly. The last Clara saw of him, he was boarding a stagecoach for the East, a small, withered man carrying a carpet bag, leaving behind a congregation that no longer looked at him with reverence, but with the cold clarity of betrayal. The removal of the rot allowed the town to breathe again. It did not become a paradise overnight. Men still spat when they saw Yazzie riding down the street. Women still crossed to the other side of the road to avoid walking too close to Clara, but the overt violence was gone, replaced by a grudging, wary truce. In the freight office, a different kind of revolution was taking place. Clara stood at the blackboard, which was actually just a section of the wall painted with black tar paint. "Today," she said, holding up a piece of chalk, "we are going to learn names." She wrote "horse" on the board. "In English," she said. "This is a horse." She turned to Thomas. "Thomas, what is the word in your language?" The boy hesitated, looking at the white children around him. Billy McAllister, the former bully, was chewing on the end of his pencil, watching. "Lee," Thomas whispered. "Speak up," Clara said gently. "There is no shame in a word." "Lee," Thomas said louder. Clara attempted to write it phonetically on the board, though the alphabet struggled to capture the glottal stops and tones of the dying language. "Lee," Clara repeated, her accent terrible. The Navajo children giggled. It was a pure, unburdened sound. "It is hard," Clara admitted with a smile. "Billy, you try." Billy McAllister looked at Thomas. 3 weeks ago, he had shoved Thomas into the dirt. Now, he looked at the board. "Lee," Billy tried. "Lee." Thomas corrected him, not with malice, but with the patience of a teacher. "Lee," Billy said again. "Better." Thomas said, "It was a small thing." a microscopic shift in the tectonic plates of their culture. But as Clara watched them, she saw the walls thinning. They were learning that the other had a voice, and that voice had words for the same world they all lived in. It was not political. It was not a treaty signed by generals. It was just children calling things by their names. The summer heat began to break, signaling the approach of the monsoon season. The clouds piled high in the afternoons, purple and gold, promising the rain that would wash the dust from the air. One evening, as the sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in aggressive strokes of violet and burning orange, Clara locked the door of the freight office. She was tired. Her hands were stained with chalk and ink, but it was a good tired. She walked to the edge of town, where the desert scrub began. Yazzie was there, as he was every evening. He was fixing a section of corral fence for Mrs. Hawthorne, hammering nails with effortless, rhythmic strikes. He saw her coming and stopped. He took off his hat and wiped his forehead with his sleeve. The silver conchos on his hatband caught the dying light, flashing like heliograph signals. Clara walked up to him. She did not stop until she was close enough to smell the cedar smoke and leather that always clung to him. "The fence is strong," she said. "It will hold," Yazzie replied. "The wood is good." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the horizon. "I received a letter today," Clara said, "from the new school board. They want to formalize my contract. They offered me $35 a month and a permanent position." "That is good money," Yazzie said. "You have won." "Yes," Clara said. "I have won the school. I have won the town's respect, or at least their fear." She reached out and touched the silver concho on his belt. The metal was warm from the sun. "But I am tired of winning wars." "Yazzie, I want to build a peace." Yazzie looked down at her hand on his belt, then up to her eyes. "What are you asking?" "Clara." Clara looked at him. She remembered the day in the square, when he had claimed her to save her life. "She is my wife." It had been a lie then, a shield forged from necessity. "In the square," Clara said softly, "you asked the town for my life. You claimed me because I had no voice." She stepped closer. "I have my voice now. I have my name, and I am using it to ask you." She took a breath, her heart hammering against her ribs, loud as the dented bell. "If you still want, if the offer was not just a tactic, then this time, I am the one asking. Yazzie Begay, will you take me as your wife not to save me, but to walk with me?" Yazzie stared at her. His face, usually so impassive, cracked. A raw emotion shone through disbelief, hope, and a profound, quiet joy. He did not answer immediately. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing the ink stains on her fingers. "You are a teacher, Clara," he said, his voice rough. "That is who you are. That is your fire." "I can be a teacher and a wife," she said. "I know," Yazzie said. "But I want to be sure. I want you to be Miss Rowe first. I want you to know that you do not need me to complete you. You are whole." "I am whole," Clara said. "But I am lonely in my wholeness, and I love you." The words hung in the air between them, simple and absolute. Yazzie smiled. It was a smile that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. "Then I accept," he said. "But on one condition." "What condition?" "That you teach me to read that book of yours, the one with the poetry." Clara laughed, and he pulled her into his arms. He kissed her, not with the violence of the square, but with the slow, burning heat of the desert sunset. It was a kiss of equals, a treaty signed in breath and heartbeat. They did not marry in the church. The church had been part of the lie. They married 3 weeks later, in the small garden behind Mrs. Hawthorne's shop. It was a private ceremony. There were no guests from the town council. Deputy Tom Vance was there, standing tall and awkward in his Sunday suit. Lila Benton was there, holding a bouquet of wildflowers she had gathered from the canyon. Mrs. Hawthorne stood beaming, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, and Grandmother Naash Jai was there. She sat in a chair of honor, watching with her sharp, black eyes. Clara wore a dress of pale cream cotton. It was simple, unadorned with lace or ribbons, cut to allow movement. It was a working woman's wedding dress. Yazzie wore his best shirt, clean and pressed, and a new necklace of turquoise and silver. There was no minister. They spoke their promises to each other, under the open sky.
I choose you,
Clara said, holding his hands, to share the fire and the water, to stand between you and the storm, to honor your blood as I honor my own.
I choose you,
Yazzie replied, to walk the path, whether it is smooth or stony, to protect your spirit, but never to cage it, to be the earth under your feet. Grandmother Naashjai stood up then. She hobbled forward, leaning on her cane. She reached into her pouch and pulled out a length of red wool yarn. She tied one end around Yazzie's wrist and the other around Clara's. It was a loose tie, not a bind.
Hosho,
the old woman whispered. Harmony. It was not a symbol of assimilation. Yazzie did not become white. Clara did not become Navajo. The red thread was a bridge. It connected two separate cliffs, allowing passage between them, while acknowledging that the chasm existed. Mrs. Hawthorne served cake and lemonade. Lila played a tune on a fiddle she had been learning. And as the sun went down, Clara and Yazzie danced on the packed earth of the yard. They moved together, the schoolteacher and the tracker, spinning slowly in the twilight. They were an anomaly in the territory, a union that defied the laws of probability and prejudice. But as they danced, Clara knew that they were building something stronger than any law. They were building a home. Epilogue. 2 years later, the monsoon rains had been good that year. The desert was transformed. The red dust was hidden beneath a carpet of green sage and blooming yellow brittlebush. The creek ran clear and deep, singing over the stones. The schoolhouse, the old freight office, had been painted white. A new sign hung over the door, Copper Creek Community School. It was recess. The yard was filled with the chaotic energy of 20 children. They were playing a game of tag, running in circles, shouting. Clara stood on the porch, watching them. She was heavier now, carrying the weight of a child who would be born before the first frost. She rested a hand on her stomach, feeling the small, fluttering movements of a life that would belong to two worlds.
Ha-i-ba-nanina,
a voice shouted.
What are you doing?
You are it, another voice replied in English. The languages mixed and mingled in the air, seamless and unforced. The children switched between them without thinking, using whatever word fit the moment best. They did not see the boundaries that the adults clung to. They only saw the game. Yazzie was leaning against one of the support posts of the porch. He was whittling a small toy horse from a piece of cedar. He looked older, the gray beginning to touch his temples, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. He looked at the children. Then he looked at Clara. His gaze dropped to her stomach, and his expression softened into a profound tenderness. He kicks today, Yazzie said quietly. Clara corrected with a smile.
She is dancing.
She will be a runner, Yazzie said, nodding toward the children. Like her mother, running toward the trouble, not away from it. And she will be a listener, Clara said, resting her hand on his arm. Like her father, hearing the wind before it storms. The brass bell hung silent by the door. It did not need to ring yet. There was time. The West was still wild. There were still men like Wade Cutler in the world, men who would take and crush. There were still droughts and floods and hard winters. The road ahead would not be easy for a mixed-blood child in a territory struggling to become a state. But as Clara watched the children play under the vast, endless blue of the Arizona sky, she felt a deep, abiding peace. They had carved out a space for truth. They had built a fortress of dignity in a landscape of indifference. Honor, she realized, was not something the town could give you, and it was not something they could take away. It was not a badge or a title. It was the simple, daily act of standing your ground. It was the refusal to look away. It was the courage to stitch the world back together with truth, with patience, and with a love that respected the freedom of the other. Yazzie handed her the small cedar horse. It was smooth and warm. "For the dancer," he said. Clara took it. She leaned her head against his shoulder. The wind blew, smelling of rain and sage and the future. "Yes," she whispered. "For the future." The bell caught the light of the sun, gleaming gold against the white wood. And in the schoolyard, the laughter of the children rose up like a prayer, loud and defiant and full of life. The end. Thank you so much for listening to this story of Clara and Yazzie. I hope you enjoyed their journey through the rugged landscapes of the heart and the Wild West. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Are you listening from a busy city, a quiet countryside, or somewhere in between? Let's connect in the comments if you enjoyed this tale. Please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales. Don't forget to hit the like button and press the hype button if you want to help this story reach more listeners. Your support means the world to me and helps keep these campfire stories burning bright. Until next time, keep your boots dusty and your heart true.